Hello, everyone, and welcome to Global Gurus. For every Friday, we explore stories of international business and speak with industry leaders operating around the world. I'm your host, Philip Auerbach of Auerbach International. Thank you for joining us. If you're tuning in for the first time, we start each podcast with a running segment called Faux Pas Fridays, where we present a funny blooper or mistranslation that does not quite convey the professional image that your organization wants to project. So since our guest today speaks French and has worked in France, I thought it would be appropriate to present a sign in English on a Paris women's clothing boutique that said very simply in English, dresses for street walking. So with that, today's guest is Max Sutherland. Max comes to us with extensive international experience from his time on Wall Street in commercial banking, in global payment projects, mergers and acquisitions, and Big Four consulting, to his current role as president and CEO of the World Trade Center Atlanta. With responsibilities having spanned 6 continents and numerous cultures and industries, he has strategized, managed, or worked in nearly every country in the world at some point in his career. He earned his bachelor degree in political science and economics from Indiana University, attended the Princeton University in France, and received his MBA from Duke University's Fuqua School of Business. Max speaks multiple languages and is a champion for understanding peace through trade. Hello, Max, welcome.
Philip, thank you. And thank you for inviting me to your podcast.
Pleasure. So perhaps we could start by your sharing with us a bit about your background and how you grew up and how you gained your global experience beyond what I already just said.
Actually, there is a lot there. And I gotta be honest, I was very lucky. Born to a German mother, an American father. The German side of the family still remains in Germany, but visited here when we weren't there. A story that I love to share with everybody is that I was actually a pioneer in aviation history. At the age of 11, my grandmother in Germany requested that only I spend my summers with her in Europe to begin my formal training for public service, more specifically the diplomatic corps. This was pre-dereg, so this was before, I think deregulation was in 72 or 73. And I flew transatlantic from Indianapolis to LaGuardia, changed LaGuardia to Kennedy, Kennedy to Frankfurt, changed and Frankfurt on to Nuremberg with unaccompanied. No adult flew with me. Nobody else flew with me.
And how old were you?
I was 11 years old.
Wow.
And that was at a time when there was still a lot of kidnappings going on. So my parents had taken out an insurance policy to pay any ransom just in case. I found out about that many years later. I knew that they had taken out a policy, but I didn't know why. And I found out many years later that it was to pay ransom in case I were kidnapped. But most children who did not fly with their parents either flew with bodyguards or nannies or another responsible relative, and I did not. So I was lucky in that respect, and that actually kind of set the path of my education and my career, and then subsequently my education, my work experience had always then been in the international space due to my language skills and my knowledge and exposure to European cultures. And then global scope was only a natural progression from that.
That's fascinating. It's wonderful that you grew up international in that way.
Yeah, I was lucky.
Well, speaking of international, what does international business mean to you? Is it something that, if a person is just writing a book or doing a seminar abroad, is that international, or is it something more than that?
Well, anything that happens outside of our borders is, of course, international, but there's a lot more that goes into it than just that. There are, of course, cultural insights, nuances, sensitivities that have to be considered with regard to the product, the content, the target audience, distribution, marketing, financial interactions, platforms, etc. So international business is everything that you would do here,
Mhm.
but on a much larger scale, because there are a lot of things that are done here intuitively because you grew up in this environment.
Right.
Overseas, you have to learn what you don't know.
Ah, yeah, that's fascinating. Other guests have said the same thing, to learn what you don't know.
You have to learn what you
Of
don't
course, you don't know what you don't know until you
know.
know it.
That's exactly it.
Um, of the many ventures you've done or have had, which do you feel have been most successful?
Well, having come up in the Fortune 15 environment and the working on Wall Street and the big banks, they have a lot of resources at their disposal. So they don't really go into anything where there's a blunder. They iron out any potential blunders long before they happen because they've been there and done that a century ago.
Right.
However, I do want to share that I took a little break in my corporate career in the mid 90s. And you know how everybody, most people want to play in a rock band or something like that. I always wanted to record an album. Back then it was an album. And I asked the right questions. I was introduced to the right people, and I ended up launching, I recorded two club songs, two dance songs, and I marketed these songs on both CDs and vinyl around Europe and North America. And I had first off, I had the time of my life. I also did a music video that aired here in New York for about eight months. So I had the time of my life doing it. I landed a great.
Is this, were you part of a band? Were you
Nope,
singing, playing?
no, I was singing. All the instruments were computer produced except one.
Wow.
The saxophone was the only live instrument, and that was Lou Marini from the Blues Brothers Band and Saturday Night Live that played live for me.
Wow.
And I did it for a couple of reasons, but from the business perspective, it was to test my marketing theories, because I'd always been on the operations side of the house in on Wall Street, and I felt that the operations side and the sales and marketing side were not communicating well. So I tried out my theories, and my theories of niche marketing worked. And as a result, I ended up hitting the charts in Spain with one of the songs.
Wow, that's great. And how old were you when you did that?
Oh my God, I was 35.
Oh,
I did that.
you were an older musician.
36, 37, somewhere around in there. Yeah, my mid 30s.
Okay, I thought maybe you were a teenager or something.
No. I took a break from Wall Street.
Oh,
And then
from
I
Wall
went back.
Street. That's right. You
And I
said,
went back in.
yeah, that's incredible. That's wonderful. Perhaps, are there any, you said that obviously there were no business blunders in the banks themselves. Do you know of, have you heard about any blunders that other companies perhaps have done?
Well, you know, they have the notorious one, and I understand it's really not true. It's the Nova car.
Yes.
But we all know that that's supposedly not true.
Right.
Or at least we're being told that's not true. I did have a personal blunder early in my career when I lived in Paris. I was around 19 or 20 years old, I think 20. I was invited by the wife of the Minister of Labor to a penthouse terrace party of the Minister of Finance of France, and it was a casual event. I was in the summertime, so people were dressed very casually, and they had a cookout with hot dogs and hamburgers and that kind of stuff, right?
Very high cuisine, French
Exactly.
high cuisine.
Very French. And I remember the line being very long, and I had tried to be impressive or whatever. and I said very loudly, "Mon Dieu, c'est un grand que." And the wife of the Minister of Labor immediately grabbed a hold of me and said, "Oh my God, you have no idea what you just said." And what I said was in colloquial French, "My, what a big penis." And
Instead of,
instead of "what a long line this is," for the buffet line, right?
in a penthouse. How
At a
wonderful.
the Minister of Finance's penthouse party, yes. Everybody laughed. I was the American, the embarrassing American,
Right.
and everybody got a big kick out of it.
That's wonderful. I heard a story years ago. I don't know if this is true, but a very prominent businessman had given his wife a very fancy diamond necklace. They were going to the opera that night, and they were dressing, and she was putting on her diamond necklace. And he said, what are you doing? What are you possibly doing?" I said, "Well, I'm putting on the necklace." Said, "You can't put on that necklace. The Minister of Finance will be at the opera. He'll see that we've got all this money. He can raise our taxes." So, one has to be careful with the Minister of Finance.
You know what? You have to know your audience, and you have to be very careful.
Right. That's wonderful. What kind of experiences do you think people need to know when they're in international business to thrive?
I get this question quite frequently because people want to know how it was that I got into the international space. And was this something that I was able to do late in my career? I have to say, I was just plain lucky to have had the family background and the means to travel. I took advantage of programs that were offered abroad during undergraduate years, and I was never ever afraid to experience something new. And I think that's the key, is to get the exposure early. Take it, in undergraduate education schools, there are a lot of programs, foreign study programs. Some are abroad programs, semester abroad programs, semesters at sea. Take advantage of those. If you can do it, take advantage of it, because it will set the course for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. I took your advice. I did my I did a sophomore semester in France, and I did my junior year in Japan. And in graduate school, I studied in China, which back then was incredibly unusual. China wasn't open to the world yet. It was fascinating. How do you think that you adjust to a foreign market when the culture or the country doesn't match what you know?
Well, you've got to get boots on the ground and learn. You've got to either tap into the local inhabitants or the businesses that are there, or set up a venture, a joint venture agreement with a local business in order to get that insight. If you don't have the means to get it any other way, the best way to go in is in a joint venture. But I also think that, and this somewhat relates. When I was at Chase years ago, I was responsible for the sales and product management teams globally in 3 different businesses. And the product management teams would come out with new financial instruments, products. And it was up to the sales teams, the international sales teams, to deliver and sell these to their client base, which was not necessarily in their home market. They may have had to travel. Example, the African accounts, most of the salespeople lived in Europe, and they would travel to Africa to the various financial institutions that were clients of Chase Manhattan Bank. And what we realized was that sales were plateauing. No matter how many new financial instruments or solutions that we came up with, the salespeople had plateaued at whatever their sales peaks were or their sales levels were. And we did some investigation into it. What we realized is that the product management team, and mind you, this goes back to the early 90s, the product management team would produce these manuals that would describe all the features and functions and benefits and capabilities of these new product solutions, and binder in hard copy binder format. And that these binders were staying in the office at the salespeople's headquarters. And they were traveling, most of the time they were on the road to visit clients. And as a result, they only sold the products and pitched the products that they knew the best. And they didn't pitch the ones that were coming out, the newer products. So we had to come up with a new solution that and a new technology solution that enabled them to carry these the information of all these products with them. And it was a very rudimentary solution, but we came up with flashcards. I mean, this was before laptops and all of that.
Right.
So we came up with flashcards and a type of a gaming practicing system for them that they could utilize on planes when they were en route to a different market. As a result, the average increase in sales went up 20% per client because of the understanding first off that there was an issue. We didn't know what the issue was, so we had to go in and investigate and interview and do some research to find out what the issue was, and then come up with a solution from that.
That's very creative. Yes. When one does business in Africa, especially in other developing countries, there are very different ways of packaging, for example. I don't know if you can share some of these stories, but for example, in the US, US and Europe and developed countries, we would sell big bottles of shampoo, for example. Well, in developing countries, people can't afford the big bottle of shampoo. So there's like one or two, they're sold in little sachets, little packets for like one day at a time, for pennies instead of dollars. Can you share some stories like that you know of?
Not the actual sizing of products, but we do get periodically someone that comes to the World Trade Center Atlanta. They're trying to get product, especially raw material, agricultural raw materials into the United States to be processed here and either sold to the local market or the US market, or then returned in a finished form back to the African market. The problem is that the US, and I'm sure Europe does as well, excuse me, we have a very strict and rigid import process, and you have to not only know the quality of your product, but you have to know the packaging and understand the packaging and what is the makeup of the packaging that product is sent to the US in. What kind of wood does the pallet come from? What is in addition to the wood, are there nails? What are the nails made out of? Where does the raw materials for those nails come from? Where are the nails manufactured? Where does the wood come from? If you use any kind of plastic wrap, where does that come from? What is the makeup of all of that? So there are a lot of, we have lists, we have forms that we help foreign companies to better understand their own products and what they're shipping in and shipping their products in to be able to get it past customs. If they don't know that, they can't get it into the country. That's
fascinating. I was not aware of that.
Yeah.
What is the purpose why did the Americans want to know all of this?
They don't want any kind of foreign materials to come into the United States to impact our local agriculture or our local environment. So if you remember, here in Georgia, you don't live here in Georgia. In Georgia, we have a lot of kudzu.
Right.
And kudzu actually comes from Asia. I believe it's from Japan, but I'm not positive.
I don't know. Yeah.
It comes from Asia.
Okay.
And kudzu is a natural growing species that can tame, I believe, weeds and that kind of stuff. But you let it get out of hand and it takes over the vegetation and
Yeah.
it takes over trees. And
Spreads
as a
wildly.
result, we have, you drive down side streets everywhere. And if they're not well manicured, the kudzu is just taken over. And that's what they try to avoid, is that kind of stuff. I think we have a lot of carp that has entered into our water streams because of the goldfish and the koi ponds and things like that. So there are other species that are not indigenous to North America, not indigenous to the United States, that have wound up here because somebody brought it in either as a pet, they brought it in as a plant, or it came in via a cargo container and it wasn't well inspected.
So the knowledge of the packaging is really to protect American agriculture.
Yep, exactly.
Okay, now that's fascinating, because I would think, what difference does it make what difference does it make what the nails are made of?
So if the packaging itself is discarded, it goes into a landfill.
Right.
How does that impact the landfill?
Okay.
So they have to know everything. There are containers that arrive at ports on the East Coast and the West Coast that go through very strict surveillance.
Mhm.
And if there's anything in the cargo container that isn't on the bill of lading, and that can be as much as one feather, if that feather is not indicated on the bill of lading and it is detected inside the container, that container is shipped back to the place of origin and never opened.
Wow, that's extremely strict. I know we have very strict agricultural protections here. I didn't realize that it was, I didn't realize it was that strict in terms of the import manifest.
Absolutely. And
Well,
that's why when you travel as an individual overseas, and upon your return, you're asked if you had visited a farm in the last so many days.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because of the soil that may be on your shoes.
Wow. That's fascinating. When you cross the border, the land border from, say, Nevada into California, I've always thought it was amusing because it's like a customs station. You're entering the Republic of California, so they have their own customs post, but it's basically an agricultural inspection station.
I have never seen those before, and I have driven from Nevada into California.
And you've never seen one?
I don't remember seeing one. Now, mind you, I may not have been behind the wheel.
Yeah.
And it's been a long time since I've made that trip.
Yeah, they're just past Lake Tahoe when you come in.
I have been to Lake Tahoe before. And we started in California, went over to Nevada to Lake Tahoe, and then came back in. But I just don't remember. It's long ago.
I think if you've got California license plates, then you waved through. I think that's the difference. So if you have a rental car, it's different. But so when I drove, for example, from Pennsylvania one time cross country, and I was bringing house plants, and then they confiscated the house plants because those were illegal. I could not bring those into California because of the agriculture.
So I have to share a little story that my parents knew was illegal because my mother was German. My parents now are both deceased, but because my mother was German, we grew up in a very Germanic household here in the U.S. And on one of the trips in the 60s, when we would spend our summers there and some winter vacations, but one of our summer vacations, my mother and my grandmother went out to the Bavarian woods and dug up a little seedling for a pine tree. And we don't know, there are three of us children. We each had two carry-on bags of toys. And my grandmother and my mother had wrapped it up in aluminum foil. Mind you, they didn't do x-rays back then, right? So
Right.
they wrapped it up in aluminum foil and they placed it at the bottom of one of our sacks. And none of us ever knew who actually was the one that carried it in. One of the children, one of the three children, smuggled in this little seedling from the Bavarian woods. And that little seedling was planted in Indiana, and it traveled from place to place as my parents moved and bought a new home. They would dig it up and replant it. The last house, it was too big for my parents to dig up and move down to Florida, so they left it. And it is this towering, towering pine tree that everybody, I had gone back for a trip down memory lane in 2009, and I stopped at that house and I happened to take pictures of this tree, and the owners came out and I let them know that we used to live there, and they wanted to know where this tree, if we knew anything about this tree, because it didn't look like anything from Indiana.
Right.
Nothing, right? We've been waiting for this tree to hit Rockefeller Center as one of the Christmas trees one year. It hasn't hit yet, but it's huge. I even got pine cones from it. But I explained the whole story. I mean, this tree has to be every bit of over, I don't know, 60, 70, 80 feet high.
Wow.
It's huge.
That's amazing.
The whole underside canopy takes up a very large part of the front yard.
Wow.
Yeah. So we did something we were not supposed to do.
So child smugglers.
It
That's great.
all worked out, but I would never recommend that to anybody.
No, not nowadays. That's wonderful. Based on all that you know now, if you had the chance to give your past self some current advice, what would you tell yourself, do you think?
Just have fun and stick to your goals.
That's great.
Have fun, stick to your goals, and when opportunity knocks, open the door and say yes, as long as it fits in line with your goals. If it can help you add some kind of additional depth to what you bring to the table, take advantage of it.
That's great. Thank you. One final question. Are there any countries that you've dealt with that were very difficult, very challenging, very difficult, posed special issues that Americans would never think of?
Well, yes. I mean, there are other countries like that all over the world, whether it's culture, whether it is language, whether it's etiquette. I can share with you one of the big issues that actually knocked one of the projects off track when I was at KPMG in New York. We were working with SAP, which is the world's largest ERP provider in the world. I think they corner like 40 some or 50% of the market. I know they're very heavy on at least manufacturing. We were trying to get them into financial services. We were working together, KPMG, we were working with SAP to design a customer profitability solution. I was actually the brainchild behind the solution itself. Long story on that I won't get into at the moment, but at one point, a meeting between senior executives at KPMG and senior executives at SAP, there was a breakdown in communications. The German way of doing business is very blunt, to the point. They lay their cards out on the table, what they expect, and that's it. And the Americans are very, they tend to be non-committal, and they walk around on eggshells a lot. And the Germans were frustrated. The Americans were frustrated. At one point, the American executives at KPMG got up and walked out of the meeting, and it derailed the project for a good month or so. And my grandmother, on my mother's side, was passing away, and I had to go back for the funeral. So I asked if I could just schedule a quick side trip once I land in Frankfurt and rent a car out to Waldorf, where SAP's global headquarters is, and see if I can meet with them and see what I can do. I did that. I had two 45-minute meetings separated by a half an hour in which they convened, and then we reconvened for that second 45-minute meeting. I then went back to the airport, dropped off my car, flew on to Nuremberg, attended the funeral, and I was there for a week, and then flew back to New York. Though having put New York in the driver's seat, I nailed down SAP to next steps, deliverables, and timeframes, all because I spoke the language. I understood their way of doing business, and I conducted it the exact same way, and they were very happy. And as a result, that solution is now part of SAP's CRM module. It's a customer profitability solution.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's great.
So that what could have totally derailed the project was just a matter of cultural misunderstanding.
Right. That's fascinating. Thank you. Thank you so much. Max, it's been a wonderful pleasure to gain your insights and your stories and the humor that you've shared, both with the French and the Bavarian trees and so forth. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your being here with us today.
Philip, it was my pleasure. Thank you so much for having invited me.
Yeah. So this has been Philip Auerbach of Auerbach International. Please join us again next week for another edition of Global Gurus and their stories of international business.